notice as well, and we'll check that out. Wilmot farmers are protesting at the City Hall in Kitchener, or I'm not sure if it's Kitchener or Waterloo. I think it's Kitchener. It might all be the same anyway, but I'll show you that. And I'm concerned that they're going to try and crack down on these protesters similar to how they were trying to crack down on the convoy protesters. So I hope I'm wrong about that, but my gut feeling says Doug Ford is going to try and make these people's lives difficult after making their lives difficult, right? After putting them in a situation where they have to protest against the government and inform people about what's going on. Now Doug Ford is going to say, well, you can't do that, and I'll show you. We're going to start there. Durov is out of jail, but he can't leave France. So that's interesting, and the free speech aspects. We're going to talk about the ongoing invasion and climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to start with the Wilmot farmers who are putting pressure on their local city councillors. Nina says, tractors everywhere. Waterloo Regional Council meeting tonight. So much support for the Wilmot farmers. So that's good news. This video is kind of loud, so I will turn it down. But you know.
All these tractors came to Waterloo Region. There's so many tractors, so many. I can't even video them all. So this is amazing. This is support for the Wilmot farmers.
So the Doug Ford Ontario, they might as well be Liberal Conservative government, are trying to take the farmers' land, to expropriate it or buy it at a low rate. And it seems like BlackRock is involved, and some of the farmers have already sold, but some are trying to fight this, and they're organized and they are pushing back. And so that's interesting. Canadian Independent has been watching this as well. They say farmers have overtaken the streets of downtown Kitchener, Ontario this evening, protesting the region's attempted land grab of 770 acres of precious farmland for reasons that remain unclear. Did you see the cruisers fly through there with the lights going? Is that for these guys, or maybe it's for the fancy car that just drove through the frame? I'm not sure, but it's very interesting. Again, the pressure both ways, right? Like, is this for this? You got to wonder. I wonder. Ryan says they were going to build a battery plant in Wilmot near Kitchener Waterloo, but I thought that was suspended. I thought it was suspended too. I thought it was suspended. Maybe they still want the land. Canadian Independent says they won't say what the land is for. The farmers have filed 21 Freedom of Information requests to try and find out, and they have all been denied. So yeah, that's strange, says Ryan. Yeah, weird, right? So I mean, I got a $47 million bill, which is basically telling me to F off. So it's strange unless you look at the context of what's going on, because they're doing what they're doing regardless of what we think about it, and they don't like being caught, and they keep getting caught. Right? And so they gaslight and they pretend that the people who caught them are incorrect or crazy or crackpots, and then they implement the thing that the crazy crackpot said that they were going to implement, right? Kevin Vung says drug consumption sites should not be located by schools and daycares. He says my latest op-ed in Sing Tao on why many support Doug Ford's move to protect children. To protect children would be to remove the communist ideology from the schools, to stop having affirmative action for everybody but Canadian people, to address the treasonous traitors in our House of Commons and protect Ontario from the carbon tax. But I mean, again, children, he doesn't protect children from gender ideology, right? So, I mean, like, yeah, okay, maybe he wants to shut down some safe injection sites that aren't anything but safe. But that's not really protecting children. I mean, you could frame it a few ways, but it's kind of the least he could do after years and years and years of absolutely catastrophic losses to this ridiculous program, right? Like, honestly, 2024, we knew in 2018 this was a boondoggle. In 2018, there were articles saying Guelph's overdose deaths doubled. And the premier sat around with his finger up his nose making cheesecake? Come on, give me a break. Andy Lee says, it's wild that this needs to even be said. When I hurt my foot, paramedics asked if they could take me out of town instead of the urgent care, which is the shortest wait time because it's home to a supervised drug site, and my kids were with us and they didn't want us going there. Huh. Weird, right? So welcome to Canada. We shouldn't use that convenient local medical medical establishment because it's a supervised injection site and it's very sketch, right? Not cool. 6Buzz TV. Now keep in mind, what do you think would happen if this was a white police officer helping other white police officers? Okay, just what do you think? What do you think? Here's 6Buzz. Toronto cop who admitted to helping black officers cheat on promotional exams has been handed a 2-year demotion. A 2-year demotion? Because firing her would have been what too just? Here is Lisa, and she says, this officer and all involved must be fired immediately. We need to end this dangerous practice of hiring based on DEI and instead focus on hiring those with the knowledge, skills, and capability to do the job. DEI hires not only endanger the public, but also put their own lives at risk. Common sense for common people. Do you remember the people who protect Trump? Secret Service. Right. The incompetent Secret Service woman. And could she be a DEI hire? Right. It's not exactly the same thing as what we're seeing here. But if you were trying to diversify the force, right, and bring in incompetent people, that might happen and might manifest like that, right? Very, very interesting. CP24 is reporting the same thing. Toronto cop who admitted to helping black officers cheat on promotional exams handed a 2-year demotion. She should have been fired, along with every single person that she helped cheat. Maybe not fired. The people who she helped cheat maybe could be demoted, but like she created a system of people who relied on her to get them into a position of power. Like this is seeding the ground for corruption to all the way to the top, I guess, right? Unbelievable stuff. Michelle says, so on one side, if you help people cheat and set up a corruption ring, you get a demotion. But if you wear the wrong kind of pride shirt during Pride Month, you're fired, right? You're done. You're out. Get out of here. You're done. And we're going to go after your teaching license. Michelle says, this is Trudeau's Canada. You can now be fired for wearing clothes. A teacher was fired for wearing this shirt during Pride, and it's got a Canadian flag on it. It says, this is my Pride flag. And the teacher was terminated for wearing the wrong shirt during LGBTQ month. A specialized educator with nearly 20 years of service was dismissed by the school board for wearing a shirt featuring the Canadian flag and the phrase, this is my Pride flag, during June, which is Pride Month. How dare you? Insensitive. You didn't know? If you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to fire you. It's crazy. And I mean, I worked in school boards, and the woke Karens, men and women, who run the place just keep getting worse. Like I worked in schools and in facilities, closed custody, mental health facilities, things like that. And in the early 2000s, you were just coming, the 90s was a weird time for closed custody and restraints and dealing with people who were out of sorts, et cetera, because up until the early 2000s, there wasn't on the books way to restrain a child and or like a teenager, somebody who's being aggressive, et cetera. And then something called UMAB was created. I think it was like 2002, and PMAB was created after that. So understanding and managing aggressive behavior, which was former police officers came up with this non-violent way to restrain people, but I mean, restraining somebody is violent, right? So, but anyway, there was a weird time in the 90s where you could restrain somebody and you basically just attack them. You were just like grabbing them and then getting them on the ground, like imagine a police officer attacking a criminal and then getting them on the ground face first. It was called prone. And yeah, you held their shoulders and arms down and they were face down. And then people died because of that, pressure on the lungs and things like that, people leaning on their lungs. When they're on prone position and you're holding an elbow or a forearm and a shoulder, you can lean on their back, right? And people do lean on their back, and then people have a hard time breathing and so on and so forth. People die. And nobody died in places that I worked, but like more broadly across Canada, I think 1 or 2 kids died, and they put a stop to the prone position, and that led to reforms about how to do it. And right, so like the 90s were a weird time, and then you move into the 2000s, and the people who were trying to make changes, like that seems like an obvious, like, okay, good job everybody, like you can't have people die and then not have reform around that, right? And again, this is before I really started working in the field, but when I started working in the field was when this kind of training was coming in. I was trained in nonviolent restraint technique in my college. That's part of the training, right? And so like when I went out to work, it wasn't surprising to me that we were restraining people. What was surprising to me was that other people that I was working with had never done restraint training, and like they were doing restraint training for the first time with me. And so it's married to this kind of, we have to do this to make ourselves better. And I think that you can make an argument like that's probably better to have these kind of rules around that specific thing, right? Dealing with kids. Ultimately, you can't teach children to not respond violently by responding violently. But regardless of that, I've grown as a person since then. Although if somebody is attacking you and punching you in the face, either you run away or you stop them. So there are things that happen outside of people's control in situations like that. Regardless, I digress. Those rules allowed these people who were book learned, these Karens, male and female, to take over the bureaucracy of places like schools, like mental health, like custody. And the people on the ground who have to deal with that, deal with these Karens changing the rules about like what you wear, right? Like you can't wear that. That's offensive. It's a Canadian flag. Is it offensive? Weird, right? So you start with rules that seem really reasonable, like restraint rules, and then you get to the point where you can't wear the wrong shirt, right? And so the Karens ruin everything, even though rules are necessary for a well-functioning society to a degree. You want the least amount of rules possible. Anyway, this is our grab bag of governance. This is going a little bit broad. This is going to the Vatican today. And Nick says apostasy in 3 letters. The Vatican replaces BC, which stands for before Christ, with BCE, which stands for before Common Era. So that's weird. The Vatican is wiping out BCE, right? New Vatican documents use BCE instead of BC. And so that's weird, don't you think? Since this is on the Vatican.va. Very strange. Here's Trudeau, and he's talking about the Harper years. And it's weird. The only reason I'm showing this to you is because he's kind of using Kamala Harris's "we're not going back" rhetoric, and they're not very creative, and there's a lot of cross-pollination. And for whatever reason, it's important that Canadians support Kamala Harris. Our CBC is covering it. CTV is covering it. Everybody hates Trump. Everybody loves Kamala Harris. And it's bullshit. Like, it's obviously nonsense. But I just think it's interesting, this cross-pollination. It's something to pay attention to. I don't know why it's important that Canadians are on board with the American president. I don't know why CBC matters or cares about it. The only reason I can think of is it's something to talk about that is anything but Canadian politics or anything but the problems that are happening in our country. So it's a great distraction, and it seems important, like this presidential election is going to really impact Canada. But your municipality is impacting you. Canadian Tire is impacting you. I'll show you that in a minute. Justin Trudeau is impacting you. Cost of milk is like 4 times what it is in the United States. Double? 3 times? 250 divided by, anyway, depends on where you are. If you're in Newfoundland, 4 times. But it is, there are problems in Canada that the news isn't focusing on, but the news is focusing on America, and Justin Trudeau is talking just like Kamala Harris, using her slogans. So here he is. It's only 10 seconds, but 10-second Trudeau warning. Here we go.
I don't need to remind you of the Harper years. You know that those were dark days, and you know that we can't afford to go back.
Right? We will not go back. Those were dark days. Oh yeah, I remember when food was cheap, housing was plentiful, and like people had jobs and things, right? Oh, terrible, those Harper years. Now, the problem I have with Harper, obviously, is that he sold Canada out to the globalists, the 2030 agenda, and so on and so forth. He played ball with the globalists because he didn't see another way out, I think. I don't think that he was a globalist. I think the globalists found themselves with a prime minister in Canada who was kind of swept to power because people were sick and tired of the other ones, and the other globalist parties had kind of collapsed, and this conservative party had been put together by the remnants of all of those conservative parties, as far as I understand it. I hope I'm not getting it too wrong. And then as that conservative party grew up, it would be hard to infiltrate that core group, and Harper ruled very, very closely, right, with an iron fist. A lot of people said like everything goes through the PMO and Harper himself a lot of the time. So it would be difficult to get into that inner circle and then steer it. Harper wanted to steer it. And so the way they got to him, in my opinion, is that they said basically, if you don't do this, we're going to destroy Canada's economy. You'll sign the 2008 rescue agreement or whatever, because if you don't, you'll lose all of your auto manufacturing. And like, how much does that bring in taxes, right? In income tax. So I mean, on one side, he was willing to play ball and understand that if he didn't play ball, Canada was going to be destroyed. But he didn't understand that over a long enough timeline, Canada is going to be destroyed anyway. Like, you lose now or you lose later, right? And so he decided to lose later, and here we are, right? Losing later, unfortunately. So it's unfortunate, and I don't know how it's all going to go, but people are getting sick and tired of it, I think. It seems like people are getting tired of all of this nonsense and they want sanity back. I don't think that we can regain sanity unless there's a conflict, but I hope I'm wrong about that. I don't want a conflict any more than anybody else. Well, any more than any sane person. Like, do you understand what happens to chocolate cereal in a conflict? Come on. Brian Lilly says, I have questions. Let's talk about the BC. There's a BC election up on the horizon, and EB is very unpopular, the current premier of BC. And so Brian Lilly says, let's start with what the heck is going on in British Columbia? So Brittany actually brings us up to speed. Thank you, Brittany. She says, this is amazing. Look at John Rustard's journey in the last 24 months. And she says, a 4-part mini thread. Too long didn't read. Epic comeback. August 18th, 2022, the BC Liberals removed John from caucus for questioning some of the climate change science. So, well, that's good, right? Here's a clip of that article. Longtime BC Liberal MLA removed from caucus after questioning climate change science. And so he's done. Now, in BC, Liberals are actually conservatives. So that's how I had it explained to me. The Liberals were more conservative in BC than anywhere else, and the Conservatives didn't really have much of a presence because they just didn't grow that party, I guess. I don't know. And anyway, Brittany continues. 6 months later, John joins the Conservative Party of BC, giving the party representation in the legislature. Soon, Bruce Banman left the BC Liberals to join John, and with 2 MLAs, the party in name came back to life. Then the Liberals BC United leader tried to reconcile hostile takeover of John's success, May 2024, no go. Kevin Falcon declined our offer in December 23 to discuss a possible merger with a single message stating, and I quote, F off, Rustard said in the statement. So yeah, BC United, they tried to recombine to be a strong party. And now, August 28th, BC United has suspended operations and campaigning and election in 60 days. And the BC Conservatives campaigned on so many great things, medical freedom included, and many of the BCU MLAs crossed in 2024. Now everyone is merging. So BC United is going to merge with the Conservative Party being the leader, and the leader of the BC United stepping down and just allowing John to run the thing. So that's pretty wild stuff, right? There's big changes afoot. Is it possible that we can fix things with elections? I don't know. I really don't know. John, this is the guy who we were just talking about. He says, he's responding to Dave Eby. Eby says, no matter what our opponents do, I'm focused on what matters to you, building more homes that you can afford, lowering your costs, and strengthening your healthcare. John Rustard is planning deep cuts that will cost you, just like he did before. And John says, the only deep cuts I'm planning are on taxes for hardworking, everyday British Columbians who are struggling to make ends meet. So there you go. We'll see. I'll let you know if John is able to win this one. It seems to me all that's required is to stop lying to the constituents, to then say what you're going to do. Like, I'm going to cut these carbon taxes because they're stupid and they don't do anything for anybody. Like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think being honest is a winning platform. Really, honestly, because the crap that these people are shoveling is feet deep, right? Like they're covered in it, and it's all bullshit. Matt says, remember when they demanded masks indoors during COVID? Moving on. I do. They're doing it again at Canadian Tire in Ontario. Time to say no. Lost Freedom Files 1512. So I can't confirm. This is what Melissa says 14 hours ago. She says, what? Masks are required when paying inside for gas? Nope. I didn't last time and I won't this time. And this time I will feel, because last time I didn't feel bad about it, but the social pressure was enough that, like, when I was going to a grocery store, I knew I wasn't going to comply, and I knew people were going to give me a hard time. And you have to talk yourself into it. Like, not talk yourself into it, but like, if something happens, I'm not going to put myself in a dangerous situation, but I'm going to hold my ground. I'm not going to buckle. I'm not going to apologize. I'm going to do what I need to do and, stand up to crazy Karens who think they can, I don't know, intimidate me into compliance with this weird social norm that they want me to comply with. And I never did. But I had some weird arguments with people who would come and stand close to me and like start yelling and stuff. And I was like, you guys are weird. Like, this is a very strange thing to do. You understand that, right? If you're worried about me spreading disease, you standing near to me is a very strange choice. And then I had other people come up and shake my hand. And like one guy just grabbed my hand. I was walking down the aisle and he came up and I was watching him because he was looking really intently at me. And I was like, oh crap. Right. And he was like, I just got to shake your hand. I was like, and because you want to hit me? Like, what? But he was like, no, I want to shake your hand because like you're doing this. Like, how do you do it? And I said, just take the mask off, man. Like, that's how you do it. You just take the mask off. You just say no. And it looks like we might have to do it again and say no and say no and say no. And when they try again, say no. Here is Nick. What's his name? Nick. What's his name? I can't remember his name. I think, Nick Hudson hat there. Haha. I've seen this guy before. He's talking about how it's a scam. This is all a scam. It's a scam. We're being bamboozled. Anytime that they behave like they're behaving, anytime that they try and intimidate you, it's a scam. They're not trying to help you for your safety, comrade. They're trying to take control, and it's a scam. And the language they're using lays their game bare. Here's Nick.
Do you think there is a problem?
It's too fast. I'm sorry. Too fast. It's 2 minutes, and when you do it in 2 times speed, you can do it in a minute. And I listen to it in a minute. And okay, here we go.
What do you think? Do you think there is a parallel because between both COVID and climate?
Yes. Let's take a step back. The general rule of thumb that I believe everybody should adopt is that if any problem is being presented as a global crisis, then it is a scam. And the pattern that we are confronted with,
it includes climate change. If they say this is a global crisis, okay, what's the global average temperature? At what time of day? It's not globally the same temperature across the globe because some places have full noon sunlight. Other places don't have full noon sunlight. That's going to affect temperature. So are you taking the temperature at 11 o'clock? Are you taking the temperature at 1 o'clock, a.m. or p.m.? Are you taking the temperature on a cloudy day? Are you taking the temperature in a meadow or at an airport? These people are lying, and they're using our apathy and Cloward Piven, actually. They're overwhelming us with like too many choices. Like you could have this hat or 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 this hat. And by 15 hats in, you're like, okay, we've got to narrow it down to 2 hats. Like, hold on. So you narrow it down to what seems most plausible. Climate change is happening and more taxes and increased immigration is the only solution to everything, is the only solution to these global overwhelming problems. But it's bullshit because the actual real problem is potholes. The actual real problem is your family's issue locally today, not 100 years from now, what the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is going to be. It's just not. And they're scamming us with everything. Okay, back to Nick. I'm sorry. I just have to break in. I'll back him up a little bit.
Then it is a scam.
It's a scam.
And the pattern that we are confronted with is really the fabrication of global crises. The presentation either of non-existent problems or small local problems as being general global crises. That fabrication followed by the assertion that the only solutions that are permissible are global ones that require a global authority, global control. That is the general pattern that we are up against. The COVID policy response was one of those. Look at what happened to countries like Sweden or Tanzania, who tried to push back against the orthodoxy, the new orthodoxy. And the climate crisis, the climate change crisis, is another example where we are told that the biggest threat to the world is this molecule, CO2. And that an increase in the level of this molecule will cause an increase in temperature, and that temperature increase will be bad for us, and that the only thing we can do is consume fewer fossil fuels and less energy. That's fitting the pattern exactly. The other things you can observe is instead of presenting science as an ongoing, evolving activity, it is presented in terms of static knowledge, consensus. And you see the cancellation and censorship of dissident voices rather than engagement with them. These patterns are proof of a scam. That is what people need to understand. Whenever something is presented as the science, as a consensus, it is a scam. You do not have to go and get engaged in all of the minutiae of the scientific principles and the models and the measurements at all.
The model's the scam.
You can know with absolute certainty that you are dealing with a scam when dissent is suppressed.
Yes. Yes. The model itself is a scam as well. The model itself is utilized by the scam artists. It's like, have you ever seen Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Steve Martin and that other guy? And they're scamming somebody, but it ends up in the end that, spoiler alert, they get scammed. And so, like, there are all sorts of tools that these scam artists, right? The way they look, the way they present themselves, right? Remember when the medical officer of health in Ontario, they're like, I don't even know. Like I just read what they give me. I just read what they give me. I don't even know what to say, right? And that was just brushed off, right? It's a freaking scam. And the scam artists use tools at the macro scale, and the tools and the presentation, like the suit in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, right? Like the presentation of the man in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, the presentation of the bureaucracy has to be such that it looks the part. And they did all of that. They did all of that with all of these bureaucratic, consensus, the science says this, Megatron is coming, all this crap. And it was bullshit. It was all bullshit. Excuse my French, but it's so obvious to me. And I hope that it's obvious to other people. Let's talk about climate change. Talking about BS. True North says 5 years after Prime Minister Trudeau pledged to plant 2 billion trees by the year 2030. It's like building all those houses. Never going to happen, right? The Liberal government is barely a quarter of the way there. So it's never going to happen, not going to happen. And they're liars. They're liars. Climate change is fitting or is giving CN Railway a bill of $16.2 million. BC Court of Appeal upholds an order that CN Rail has to pay $16.2 million for causing a 2015 forest fire. Yes, those forest fires. It has nothing to do with the dead trees and the fuel that has been left to lay around. It is the train's fault. The train's fault. How dare you, CN? How dare you climate change us? Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful